My name is Nancy Roberts, and I'm a professor of economics at Arizona State University. Today we're going to talk about poverty, and we're going to use a device called the Lorenz Curve to explain how we measure poverty in the U.S. And so, well, maybe before we draw the Lorenz Curve, we need to make sure we understand the difference between equal and equitable, because those are two terms that get interchanged and they're actually not interchangeable. Equality means everything is the same. So if we talk about equality of incomes in the US, we're talking about everybody has the same income. If we talk about an an equitable distribution of income in the US, then we're talking about a fair distribution of income in the US. And then we enter into the realm of subjectivity. And so we're going to get a whole lot of different opinions about what's an equitable distribution. So in economics, we don't focus so much on that, and especially not for my explanation here today. We're just going to focus on how income is distributed in the US. And so, or any country. So I'm going to use this device called a Lorenz curve. So on the horizontal axis, I'm going to put percentage of households. Percentage of households. And this thing is usually divided into quintiles. So this will be 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, and this would be 100% of the households in America, or any economy. On the vertical axis, I'm going to put the percentage of GDP, or income. How is income distributed among households in the US? And so again, we've got 20%, 40%, 60, 80, 100%. So if I draw a line that basically bisects this box, like that, what this says is, if income is distributed like that in this economy, it says that 20% of the households actually have 20% of the income in the US. 40% of the households have 40% of the income. In other words, income is distributed equally among households in the US. Now, there's no economy on this planet where income is distributed like that. In fact, income is distributed in this sort of bowed out fashion. And so what this says is, I'm going to call this economy A, which doesn't exist. I'll call this economy B, and we'll draw another one in here in a minute. But what we know about economy B is that 20% of the households in economy B only have about 8% of the income. That doesn't look very good. Let's do that again. 8%. 20% of the households have 8% of the income. 40% of the households actually have about 20% of the income. And as we move over, 60% of the households have about 35% of the income. 80% of the households have about 40% of the income. That means this 20% right here, these are the rich guys. These 20%, because these are cumulative percentages, cumulative percentiles, these 20% actually have 20, 40, 45% of the income. So income in economy B is more unequal than it is in economy A. In economy A, it's perfectly equal. We could draw another Lorenz curve in here. Let's draw this economy right here. And we'll call this economy C. And economy C is even more unequal in its distribution of income among households. And so what we would say is, well, for example, the bottom 20%, these are quintiles, the bottom quintile in economy B only has, let's just say 4% of the income. So income in economy C is much more unequal than in economy B, which is more unequal than in economy A. And if a government's interested in equalizing incomes among households, then what they can do is redistribute income, which in fact we do, and in further lectures we're going to talk about our redistribution of income. But what we can do is, in an economy like C, these rich guys right here, this top quintile, they have, let me just do it in red to keep it constant. These rich guys in economy C have 20, 40, 60, 75% of the income. 20% of the households have 75% of the income. This is very unequal. And so if the government says what we would like to do is help these poor people out in economy C, what we could do is introduce a progressive income tax, which takes at a higher rate from rich people than it does from poor people. And so what we could do with a progressive income tax is take a distribution like C and move it to a distribution like D. In other words, move it in a little bit. And obviously, the more progressive the taxes, the more you could move it. So this is one way that we look at income distribution within an economy. Now, let me draw one more graph here. Let me just do this Lorenz curve. I'm going to call, so same thing, percent of households, GDP. I'm going to call this area A, and I'm going to call this area B. And we use a measure of, it's called a Gini Coefficient, G-I-N-I, Gini Coefficient, which measures how equal or unequal a distribution of income is among households. And the Gini Coefficient, is actually area A divided by area A plus B. And the closer this is to 0, the Gini Coefficient is somewhere between 0 and 1. The closer the Gini Coefficient is to 0, the more equal the distribution. The higher the Gini Coefficient, the more unequal the distribution. Something we should say about using households as the measure of equality, income equality, is that this doesn't take into account how many people are in the household. You know, there could be one person in the household, there could be 9 people in the household. So to say that 2 households have the same amount of income isn't terribly enlightening, because we don't know how many people are living on that amount of income. At any rate, after following this video, there'll be a problem to work out using Lorenz curves and some questions to answer about it. That's the end of this discussion.